Nobody asked me if I wanted to be fit when I was growing up. It simply happened. Growing up in the 60s, fitness was not a goal or something you scheduled. It was what daily life produced as a byproduct of living the way people lived then. Nobody in my neighborhood had a gym membership. And yet the women I grew up watching, my mother, her friends, the neighbors, were strong and capable in a way that I admire more now at 72 than I did at the time when I simply took it for granted. I want to talk about this today because I think something genuinely useful got lost between then and now. Not the whole picture of how people lived in the 60s, which had plenty of problems I have no desire to revisit, but the specific physical habits and daily movement patterns that kept people fit without anyone calling it fitness. The routines that work so quietly nobody thought to preserve them, and that most of us have largely abandoned without noticing the cost. Some of what I share today comes from my own memory. Some of it comes from conversations I've had over the years with women of my generation and older. And some of it comes from simple observation. Watching what the women who aged most gracefully in my community actually did with their bodies, day after day, for decades. The first thing, walking was not exercise. It was transportation. This sounds small. It is not small. The entire category of going somewhere by foot rather than by car was simply how things were done when I was growing up, not as a choice or a wellness practice, but as the ordinary method of getting from one place to another. My mother walked to the grocery store. She walked to the pharmacy. She walked to church. She walked to visit friends in the neighborhood. Not because she was particularly virtuous about physical activity, but because that is how you went places, at least for distances that did not require the car. The car was for longer trips or for carrying things that could not be carried by hand. For everything else, you walked. The physical effect of this was significant and cumulative. A woman who walks to and from the grocery store twice a week, to and from church on Sundays, to visit a neighbor 3 afternoons a week, is walking several miles a week more than a woman who drives the same distances. Multiply that over a year and then over a decade, and the difference in physical condition is genuinely substantial, even though neither woman was doing anything that would be described as exercise. I still walk more than most women my age, and I am convinced it is one of the main reasons my joints are in the condition they are. My route to the small library in town where I do volunteer work on Tuesdays is about a mile each way. I walk it regardless of the weather. This is not a health decision. It is simply the habit I grew up with, maintained long enough to become completely automatic. If I were going to suggest one thing from this entire video as worth genuinely trying to restore into daily life, it would be this. Not a walking program, just walking to places you would normally drive to when the distance permits. The fitness returns not as a reward for an effort, but as a byproduct of a way of moving through the world. Tell me in the comments, do you walk for transportation regularly, or has driving become the default for nearly everything? I ask because I think most people underestimate how much this shift has cost them physically, and I am curious what others think about it. The second thing, housework was a full body workout, done every day without shortcuts. I want to be thoughtful here, because the physical demands of housework in the 60s were partly a result of having less efficient tools, and I am not suggesting we go back to that. But there is something worth retrieving from how physical the ordinary maintenance of a home used to be. Carpet sweepers that required real pushing effort, hanging laundry on a line, beating rugs outside, scrubbing floors on hands and knees, kneading bread by hand, washing dishes by hand for every meal. These were not exercise routines. They were the work of maintaining a house, done by women who had no particular interest in physical fitness and who would have been frankly puzzled by the concept of working out. But the cumulative physical effect of doing this work every day for years was genuine strength and genuine endurance. Arms that kneaded bread twice a week were arms that worked. Backs that spent time hanging laundry and beating rugs were backs that stayed more flexible than backs that primarily sat. The work distributed physical effort across the whole body in a way that no single exercise routine replicates, and it did so daily rather than 3 times a week for 45 minutes. I still hang my laundry on a line in good weather, not because it is superior to the dryer in every way, but because the 30 minutes of reaching and lifting and adjusting does something for my shoulders and my back that has no equivalent in my normal day. The laundry gets done, and my upper body gets used, an efficient arrangement. Before I continue, a quick word. If you enjoy this channel and want to support my work, just look directly below the video player, right next to the subscribe button, and click the button that says Join. That is how you become a Smart Organizer. Smart Organizers members get exclusive videos, a loyalty badge in the comments, and custom channel emojis. I would love to have you there. The third thing, the specific exercises women actually did in the 60s and why they worked. Now we get into what people think of when they hear the phrase 60s fitness routines. The actual deliberate exercises that were popular during that era. And they are worth talking about specifically because they were quite different from what is typically recommended now, and because the differences are instructive. The Jack LaLanne television program ran from the early 50s through the 70s and reached an enormous audience of women exercising in their living rooms. He taught bodyweight exercises, jumping jacks, standing leg raises, modified push-ups, chair exercises, stretching sequences, all done in ordinary clothes without equipment. He was teaching women with no gym access and no athletic background to move their bodies every morning, and the routines were genuinely effective. What worked about the LaLanne approach was the combination of frequency and accessibility. Done every morning, 20 to 30 minutes, requiring nothing beyond the willingness to do them. Simple enough to maintain correct form, using the full body rather than isolating muscle groups. Done consistently over years rather than intensely for short periods. I did these routines as a young woman, following along with the television program. My mother did them. Most of the women in the neighborhood did them. The jumping jacks specifically are something I still do a small number of every morning, and I can say without hesitation that they remain one of the more effective things I do for cardiovascular function and coordination at this age. Tell me in the comments, do you remember watching Jack LaLanne or any of the early televised exercise programs? I would love to know how many people watching this grew up with these routines. The fourth thing, the Royal Canadian Air Force exercises and why they were remarkable. These are less well known now, but were enormously popular in the 60s, available as a small, inexpensive booklet. The plan was developed for Air Force personnel without access to fitness facilities, built around one central principle: complete this entire workout in 11 minutes in any space large enough to lie down with no equipment. The women's version, the XBX plan, consisted of 10 exercises in a specific sequence, with increasing repetitions over charts spanning weeks and months. Stretching, sitting raises, back extensions, knee push-ups, standing stretches, side leg raises, knee bends, push-ups, running in place, and jumping. The 11-minute daily session, done consistently, produced genuine cardiovascular and muscular fitness in women who had no other regular physical activity. What I find compelling about this program in retrospect is how precisely it solved the problem it was designed for. No excuses about time, because 11 minutes is always available. No excuses about equipment or space, because none is required. No excuses about complexity, because the exercises are clearly described and the progression is explicit. The entire system was designed to eliminate every possible reason not to do it. I found my mother's copy of the XBX booklet in a box of her things years ago and kept it. I still refer to it occasionally, and the exercises in it are as sensible and effective now as they were when they were designed. Several of them are part of my current morning movement practice, including the back extensions, which do more for my lower back than anything else I have tried. The fifth thing, dancing, and how it functioned as a complete fitness practice. I want to spend some time on this one because I think it is the most thoroughly lost of all the physical practices from that era, and its loss is the one I feel most personally. Dancing in the 60s was not a special occasion activity for most of the women I grew up around. It was something that happened regularly in social contexts, at community events, at family gatherings, at church socials, at informal parties in neighbors' homes. And the dances of that era, the swing and the jive and the foxtrot, and the various popular dances of the early and mid-60s were genuinely physically demanding in ways that their participants were entirely unaware of, because they were having too much time to think about it as exercise. A woman who dances for 2 hours at a community social event, which might happen several times a month in a reasonably active social life, is doing something that combines cardiovascular exercise, balance training, coordination, and full body movement in proportions that no single workout routine replicates. The fact that it is enjoyed rather than endured means it is sustained willingly and repeatedly over years and decades rather than abandoned when motivation flags. I danced regularly until my late 50s, and I miss it in a way that I notice physically. The particular quality of the balance and coordination that regular dancing produces is different from what walking or gentle exercise produces, and I am aware of its absence in a way I was not when I had it. Several women I know have found ballroom dancing classes or community folk dancing to have genuinely meaningful effects on their balance and their physical confidence at this age. And if you have access to either, I would encourage you to take it seriously as a physical practice rather than as entertainment. Please subscribe if you are not yet subscribed. Every week I share what I've learned about living well and maintaining a home and a body that works at this stage of life. including the things we used to know and have partly forgotten. The sixth thing, gardening and yard work as genuine physical practice. My mother kept a kitchen garden, and I've kept one for most of my adult life. This is not a fitness decision. It is a life decision that produces fitness as a byproduct, which is precisely the pattern I keep finding when I look at the physical practices of women in earlier generations. Digging is full body work. Kneeling and standing repeatedly, as you do when weeding or planting, is exactly the kind of lower body functional movement that keeps the muscles around the hips and knees working. Carrying watering cans, pushing wheelbarrows, raking and hoeing and pruning, all of these use the upper body in sustained functional ways that build practical strength. And the sustained duration of garden work, typically longer than most structured exercise sessions, produces cardiovascular conditioning from an activity that feels more like care than effort. The research on gardening and health outcomes in older adults is consistent and compelling, but I do not need research to tell me what I observe. The women I know who have maintained gardens into their 70s and 80s are almost without exception physically more capable than peers who have not. Their balance is better, their grip strength is better, their posture is more upright, and they have a relationship with physical effort that people who are sedentary and then try to exercise simply do not. If you have any outdoor space at all and are not using it for something that requires regular physical tending, this is worth reconsidering. Not as a fitness program, as a practice that will produce fitness as a byproduct of the care it requires. Tell me in the comments, do you garden? And if so, do you think of it as physical activity, or do you think of it primarily as gardening? I am curious whether the framing matters to people, or whether the benefit is felt regardless of how the activity is labeled. The seventh thing, the habit of standing and moving throughout the day rather than sitting for long stretches. This is the one that has changed most dramatically between the 60s and now, and the change is entirely structural rather than personal. The 60s housewife, who was not doing deliberate exercise, was still standing and moving for many hours of the day because the domestic work of that era required it. Cooking from scratch, managing a household without the time-saving devices that are now standard, doing most cleaning by hand. These kept women on their feet and in motion for hours that are now spent sitting. The modern equivalent is the shift from occupations and domestic patterns that require sustained movement to ones that primarily require sitting. This is not anyone's fault, and I am not suggesting the 60s arrangement was preferable overall. But the physical consequence is real and worth addressing directly. The body is not designed for the amount of sitting that contemporary life involves. And the effects of extended sitting on the joints, on circulation, on posture, and on metabolic function are significant in ways that are independent of whether you also exercise. The habit worth recovering from that era is simple to describe and requires practice to implement. Stand up and move around briefly every 30 to 45 minutes during the day. Not for long, not for any particular purpose, just to break the sustained sitting pattern. Make the cup of tea. Walk to the other end of the house for something. Tend something in the garden for 5 minutes. The cumulative effect of this pattern of regular, brief movement throughout the day, done consistently, is meaningful and measurable. I have always moved this way, partly from the habits of my working years as a librarian, where I was on my feet much of the day, and partly from the domestic pattern I grew up in. My house is small enough that doing anything in it involves movement, and I have always thought of the maintenance of it as a physical practice as much as a domestic one. The phrase I find myself using is that I do not really clean my house. I tend to it every day in small ways, and that tending keeps me moving in a way that sitting still and then exercising separately never quite does. The eighth thing, the social structure of physical activity and what we have lost by privatizing exercise. The last thing I want to say about 60s fitness is the least tangible, but perhaps the most important for understanding why those patterns sustain themselves so readily over long periods of time. Physical activity in that era was largely social. You did not go alone to a gym at 6 in the morning. You walked with a neighbor. You danced at a community event. You worked in the garden while your neighbor worked in hers, and the conversation traveled over the fence. You played with your children in the yard, and the play was genuinely physical. The physical activity was embedded in relationships and community in a way that made it self-sustaining. You kept doing it because the relationships that came with it were themselves nourishing. The privatization of exercise, the move toward individual gym memberships and solo workout apps and personalized fitness plans has produced some real benefits, but has also severed physical activity from the social context that made it automatic and pleasurable for previous generations. When exercise is something you do alone, it requires individual motivation to sustain. When it is something embedded in your social life and your community, the motivation is partly external, and the activity continues even when individual motivation wavers. I notice this in my own life. The physical activities I do most consistently are the ones that are connected to other things I care about. The garden, which I maintain because I love it. The Tuesday walks to the library, which happen because I have a commitment there. The occasional afternoon with a friend that involves walking somewhere together. The activities I do purely for their own sake, as fitness practices, require more effort to maintain, and I am honest with myself about that. The practical implication, which is the same one the 60s arrived at without theorizing about it, is to find ways to attach physical activity to things you already value and to people you already care about, not as a fitness strategy, but as a way of living that happens to keep you fit as a byproduct, which is, if you think about it, exactly how it worked 60 years ago. I want to hear from you now. In the comments, tell me which of these practices from that era you remember from your own upbringing, or which one surprised you most in the telling. And tell me whether you think any of them are worth deliberately reviving in your own life, or whether you already do some version of them. These conversations matter to me, and I read every one. And please subscribe if you are not yet subscribed. Every week I share honest, thoughtful conversations about living well at this stage of life, including the wisdom we grew up with that deserves to be remembered. I will see you next week.